Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be a bit of a spooky one and one I'm personally very excited for. Today I'm going to be chatting through scary books for scaredy cats. That's right, this is a horror recommendation video for all of the faint of heart out there just like me. I personally love Halloween, I love the fall season, and I even like a book that will kind of get my heart racing. That being said though, there's only so much I can take. So navigating the horror space, if you know that you're easily freaked out and given nightmares, can be a tricky one. So today I'm going to be recommending a collection of books I honestly think are good for any reader out there, even if you really love the most disturbing and dark horror, but also really cater to the readers that want something spooky and scary, but also won't leave them traumatized at the end of the read. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into my scary books for scaredy cat recommendations. The first book I have to recommend is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And in my general opinion, I feel like Gothic horror is a perfect subgenre for people who want something eerie and atmospheric that will disturb you, but also won't necessarily horrify you to your utter soul and being. I personally am a huge fan of Gothic horror because I feel like it has all of the ambiance I'm looking for, and it also tends to have a dash of romance, which I really appreciate too. Maybe stemming from my love of Jane Eyre, I just feel like Gothic horror is something that I find to be incredibly approachable and incredibly vibey, and Mexican Gothic is no exception. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of this author, and she also has other horror-leaning tales as well, so if you like this book, I highly recommend checking out some of her other works as well. But this story follows our main character Naomi, and she is a dazzling, bright, capricious, kind of flighty socialite living in Mexico City. She's beautiful, smart. She's in her early 20s, not really looking to settle down on any one thing. However, though, at the beginning of this book, her father pulls her aside, telling her that he has received a rather startling and frightening letter from her cousin who has just recently gotten married and moved to a faraway estate to live with her husband and his family. From there, we follow Naomi as she travels to stay with her cousin, figure out what is not only wrong with her cousin and if she can help her, but also kind of solve the mysteries surrounding this mysterious family that sort of appeared out of nowhere, marrying her cousin. And when Naomi arrives at this crumbling manor, she quickly realizes that this family is not just weird, they're eerie, and the house itself is really creepy and is seemingly beginning to invade her dreams at night. This book is definitely a slow burn story, and one that is very disturbing but gripping at the same time. Naomi, as our main character, roots it so well. She's incredibly likable, she's headstrong and funny, and kind of the perfect person to sort of take on this very disturbing family, which has a long history of lots of secrets and lots of issues. This book is truly about a haunting. Not only the house, but this family has left their mark on the land for many generations, and Naomi is trying to get at the heart of this mystery, not only save herself from a very perilous situation, but her cousin as well. Don't get me wrong, this book is very dark and very disturbing. The haunting element of this, as well as just learning more about this family, is disturbing and very in line with typical Gothic horror and Gothic tropes. This is very much a slow burn story as well, introducing you to all the concepts and ideas and characters, and then all of a sudden everything sort of hits the fan. It's a page turner for sure, but I feel like this author really balances the horror with the character work and the writing, creating a really balanced story that I personally could not put down. The next book I have to recommend is a more fantasy leaning option, and that is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. This is another book that heavily leans on Gothic atmosphere and tropes, and in particular, this is a horror story that's more of a subgenre, being primarily fantasy first. This is a multi-POV historical fantasy tale set primarily in 1882 in England, following the journey of two young orphans with strange powers who are being hunted by a mysterious man of shadow in the night, and he is scary. We follow them not only as they come together, but are also transported by our other main character, who is a female detective who has been hired to protect them. We unlock mysteries not only about the origin of these two children's powers, but we also learn more about a magic school which houses other magical children too, not to mention just the overall organization and apparatus put in place to protect these children, which we kind of see through the female detective's eyes. This book is harrowing and scary, I would say, but at the same time I also feel like it's much more approachable given the fantasy elements. The magic school setting is very, very cool, and there's obviously a dark central mystery at play here, but it's not straight up horror. It definitely is much more structurally written like a fantasy tale, which I think would make it a lot more approachable, especially to more scared leaning readers out there like me, I found this to be spooky and atmospheric, but not like bone chilling, keeping me up at night, nightmares for the rest of my life kind of book. I also was really compelled by all the different settings present in this book. We are traveling a lot from the gaslit streets of London to Tokyo to Edinburgh. There's just lots of vibes to be found in this book, and learning more about this mysterious organization is just very interesting. Next book I have to recommend is a perfect read if you want things that are technically spooky and like fit within the season but is not scary at all, and in fact very, very humorous, and that book is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This book is a romp, it's a hoot, it's so silly, but the concepts and the characters involved in this are technically scary, but it's not scary at all while you're reading it, if you know what I mean. But this story follows what is supposed to be the end of the world, because according to a prophecy that a witch proclaimed in 1655, the world is going to end on Saturday, next Saturday to be exact. And the armies of good and evil are amassing, prepared to go to battle against one another. There's just been one small hiccup, and that is we have seemingly misplaced the Antichrist, who's supposed to be the catalyst to this entire thing. Enter in our two main characters. One is an angel who deals in rare books, and the other is a fallen angel, and these two characters have unexpectedly become kind of friends over the years because they've had to spend a lot of time with each other, kind of spying on each other for either side of good and evil. And this is the story of them basically trying to prevent the end of the world and getting involved with trying to locate the Antichrist. This book is just so funny and silly. The writing style and characters are incredibly likable, and all of the dialogue will absolutely pull you in. It has a lot of dry humor, and again, the topics and concepts of this are incredibly dark. I mean, we're talking about the end of the world here, and while there are definitely moments of darkness, this book is definitely very lighthearted while reading it. It's incredibly charming. I found myself laughing out loud throughout the entire experience of reading this. There's also a very good adaptation of this book on Amazon Prime, so if you read it and like it, you have a show to watch as well. It's just such a funny concept that I feel like matches the fall spooky vibes but doesn't actually have any spooky, scary vibes in it. You know, obviously I have to have a witchy recommendation in my spooky but not too spooky reads, and that is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is another very dark, very enthralling story that has spooky elements, but this time centering witches and a sort of witch hunt within a community. This is set in a Puritan-inspired place, and we follow our main character Emmanuel, who lives in the land of Bethel. And in the land of Bethel, the word of the prophet rules. Prior to the start of this novel and in the creation of the community itself, 4 witches were basically discovered in the woods and killed by the first prophet. Our main character Emmanuel does her best to sort of live her life as devoted and as submissive as possible, as expected of her, not only as a woman, but also because she sort of has this shadow over her due to events that happened again before the start of this novel involving her mother, who ran away with an outsider and actually getting pregnant by him, ultimately dying in childbirth though. At the beginning of this book, Emmanuel is in the woods and she actually discovers a journal, her mother's journal, and inside of it she learns not only about her mother's past, but also that her mother was a practicing witch. Shortly after finding this journal, weird events begin to happen in town, and the 4 witches that were killed at the founding of this community are seemingly trying to get their revenge, and very dark and very creepy sort of curses begin to rear their head within this community, creating a frenzy in town and also a hunt for witches once again. This book is so spooky and eerie for a variety of reasons. First off, the sort of puritanical setting of this book, this ultra-religious community in society, is just creepy, and seeing all the curses come to play are also like very, very disturbing and immediately put you on edge. But also just the anxiety and suspicion that the author builds within the town itself just is so, it like gets under your skin. The sort of unraveling of a community will definitely disturb you, as well as the prophet figure. Ooh, he is so spooky. Emmanuel, as our main character, roots this book fantastically. She's so easy to root for. She's headstrong and just kind of following her as she's not only trying to save herself and her community. It's just really impressive to see. This book is scary, but at the same time, I would say it's like PG-13 scary, you know? It's perfectly on that line of like making my heart race, but not absolutely ruining my life, you know? Next book I have to recommend is just one of my all-time favorites, and that is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. I don't read a lot of YA anymore, but I loved this series so much. It has such a great combination of things and tropes, and the mystery is so compelling and scary that it's just a great read to pick up, especially if you want something that's like dark but not too dark, you know what I mean? But this book is set in a very small and very prestigious school in remote Vermont. We follow our main character Stevie, who dreams of becoming an FBI agent one day, solving crimes and like trying to figure out the solution to the most dangerous and unsolved mysteries to date. In fact, she dreams of actually solving the unsolved murder that actually happened on the very campus of the school she's about to attend. Right when this school opened, the founder of the school's daughter and wife were actually kidnapped and never found. A huge reward was offered to anyone who could bring information, but unfortunately it still remains unsolved to this day until Stevie begins to look around and what actually happened. And things really begin to get eerie as Stevie's present day reality begins to match some of the elements of the crime that happened in the 20s. Again, this is actually a trilogy, and the blending of past and present that occurs throughout this series is just so good. Obviously, reading from Stevie's point of view, who is so likable and honestly really, really smart. Watching her and reading her solve these mysteries, piece together these clues is fantastic. But obviously, we are also jumping to the past, so seeing these timelines converge is also great as well. The sort of boarding school setting is great too. It's remote. These kids are also incredibly smart and have their own interesting pursuits, which is enjoyable to read. I also feel like the mystery bridged over the 3 books present in this was really well paced, kind of having mini reveals along the way, and ultimately how the entire mystery came together was very, very satisfying. I feel like this book is scary, but it's also much more of a whodunit style murder mystery, as our main character is collecting clues and trying to piece things together. And while there are definitely like scary jump scare moments, it leans more in that classic mystery space, which personally I overall just find less scary than a traditional horror story. With that in mind though, there are kind of spooky elements of this, but I just feel like it's a much more approachable option, especially if you love trying to piece together clues yourself. Next book I have to recommend is almost what I would describe as a cozy horror story. I don't know how it's possible, but this author is able to combine 2 things I never thought could be combined. And the book I'm talking about is A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Somehow this book walks the line of being so endearing and heartwarming and also utterly scary too. This book introduces us to our main character Sam. And at the beginning of this book, she receives a phone call from her brother letting her know that something seems off with mom. And after the dig that Sam was working at kind of gets shut down for a variety of reasons, she decides to travel home and stay with her mom a bit to kind of check things out. When she arrives, she immediately agrees that something seems off. The home, which is typically colorful, full of life and warmth, is sterile and everything is painted white. Her mother, who does typically have a bit of anxiety, seems incredibly jumpy, always looking over her shoulder, and in general, she's just kind of speaking differently than she typically does. And the longer that Sam begins to stay with her mom, the more she comes to realize that she thinks her mom's house is haunted. This book is so funny and scary at the same time. First and foremost, Sam, as our main character, sort of narrating everything that is going on, is just hilarious. Sam herself is also a scientist, so the dissonance of her trying to piece together what's happening, but also believing in even the concept that something could be haunted is just a really funny thing to read. I also just absolutely adore the mother-daughter relationship present in this book. It's just so unbelievably heartwarming, the love that exists between these 2 characters and the lengths that they would go for each other to protect the other was just a delight to read. There's also really funny side characters, a bit of romance, like everything you would want in like a heartwarming cozy tale. But again, there's also like a haunted house element, and the way in which T. Kingfisher sort of describes how this house is haunted and the tie-in to the overall family too was just incredibly successful, and she really did it. She walked the line of spooking me out but also making me smile and laugh. I was so endeared to everyone present in this story that I was able to get past how spooked out I was by the horror elements of this book too. It was such a fun combination that I just feel like worked so successfully, and this is a Southern Gothic tale. I obviously have recommended a lot of Gothic books. It's one of my favorite genres, but Southern Gothic, a sub-genre. So fun. You gotta read. And the last book I have to recommend is probably the scariest of the bunch. I think its balance of horror, which truth be told was very scary. This is the scariest book again I've ever read, but that combined with the humor and the characters and the concepts of this book just really sold it for me. I found it to be just a really successful experience. And that book is A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. And I feel like this book is incredibly successful because it's not only terrifying in its traditional horror approach, but the society that the author is able to paint, which allows our vampire to succeed is also equally terrifying. But this book is set in the 90s in a small suburban community in South Carolina, and we are initially introduced to a group of women who basically are all a part of the same book club, and they read like thrillers and horror novels to escape their daily lives. They all basically have like terrible husbands, and they all sort of chafe under the traditional expectations of being a wife and a mother in this time period in this community as well. But when a strange, handsome man moves into town and very quickly ingratiates himself within the community of this suburban neighborhood, our main character begins to think that something much more foul is afoot and that he's actually like a dangerous vampire. This book is spooky. I'm not gonna lie, like the horror elements of this are much more intense than any of the other horror I've mentioned within this video. Not only is the vampire character really disturbing, there's also a lot of like animal horror too that will just absolutely make your skin crawl. Lots of stuff with rats, lots of stuff with bugs, I'm not gonna lie. But I feel like this book is really successful because in combination with these traditional horror elements, there's also lots of terrifying things as a result of just society in general. Because yes, this vampire exists, but he's only able to exist and have the victims he has because of traditional suburban white middle class society turning a blind eye to all of the damage that he is doing. And that is equally terrifying too, and not a fictional horror setting at all. Like this very much exists. So these two things in tandem with one another, ooh, it becomes a page turner immediately. This book also has a lot of humor, a lot of interesting community, a lot of things that will just make you so angry while you're reading it. It's definitely a story you won't be able to put down, and I highly recommend the audiobook actually. I found the narrator to be fantastic. Alrighty guys, those are my scary books for scaredy cats. Please let me know down below some books you think are perfect and scary, but not too scary, as I would love to know. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!